Upon nominating a foreperson, the jury begins deliberations. During evidence-driven discussions, the group analyzes the evidence before deciding on a verdict. But during verdict-driven discussion, the group takes an initial vote and then organizes the evidence to support the predetermined outcome. As in other decision-making groups, a few individuals tend to dominate the discussion, with others participating only to cast their vote. As you might expect, jurors with higher social status tend to exert more social influence, be more engaged in discussions, and be more persuasive. In most cases, the majority has the upper hand, even in situations where unanimity is required. In fact, studies have found that minority influence on the majority is relatively rare, occurring in only about 10% of cases. A study involving 215 juries found that in 209 cases, the final verdict was consistent with the initial majority vote. When the larger group initially votes guilty, the final verdict is more likely to be guilty, even after extended deliberations. This suggests that it's possible to predict the final verdict with some accuracy by knowing how individuals voted at the start of deliberations. So when unanimity is not required, the minority has little influence, and deliberations tend to be shorter and members are less confident in the decision. But in situations where unanimity is required, minority members wield significant power because the larger group must persuade them or join them. If minority members refuse to conform to the majority's verdict, the result is what's called a hung jury. It means the group is unable to make a decision within the given parameters. The deliberation process is also influenced by the leniency bias, the tendency for groups to lean towards acquittal rather than conviction. It's driven by empathy for fellow jurors, who carry the weight of making a decision, and it creates an inclination towards favoring the defendant. In cases where the initial vote is evenly divided, juries are more likely to return a verdict of not guilty, in part because it's easier to raise reasonable doubts about a defendant's guilt than it is to eliminate all doubts. The size of juries has a significant impact on the verdict. Smaller juries with fewer members, typically 6 to 8, are often used to minimize costs. But in these smaller groups, minority members may struggle to exert influence on the majority due to having fewer allies. With fewer voices advocating for their perspective, minority members may be more susceptible to normative influence processes. Furthermore, smaller juries often lack diversity and spend less time deliberating, which leads to less representative and less thorough decision-making.